So I'm Evan Hirsch. I'm a partner of a consulting group called Engine Company 4. We do digital firefighting and strategy for production companies, studios, games, and film. So I started in industrial design in the 80s, and I was a model maker. And from there, I learned how to make digital models back when it cost $100,000 to buy a machine to do it. And I started making models the way you'd make them in the wood shop. And out of that, I got very lucky and met some people along the way that didn't think you could make models that way. And over about 8 or 10 years later, I wound up doing that, where we did some freelance modeling work for some important, famous people out in California, and worked our way up through that. And then over time, I got asked to help EA build a motion capture studio up here in Vancouver, and to which I replied, "What's a motion capture studio?" And we did that for a couple of years, and then we wound up building a very large and impressive facility with some great, talented people here. Did that for a couple of years, then I went back to more of my soul as design direction, visual design direction, opposed to game design direction. And I went to EA Europe and was the head of art for Europe over there. And then after a couple of years, I was head of art for EA Worldwide Studios. In 2002, I left EA and started doing some film work and some feature animation and effects in London, which I was living at the time. And then I went to Microsoft Game Studios, worked there for a bit. I was the creative director at Microsoft Surface. I worked at Live Labs for a bit, and I was recently at THQ for a little bit. And now I'm just out there having some fun, doing some work with people like PopCap, Uncharted Territory, helping them with some film game type work, and just having a good time. What I'm doing right now is I'm working with companies that want to do entertainment but use technology to serve a very creative means, and do some smart things about leveraging technology to do smarter things and how we create the content, and also how the content is interacting with you. So in one example, I'm working to use game engines to help pre-visualize films and maybe even do some other interactive media at the same time. And on the other end of things, I do a lot of work where I'm working on a complex user experience project where we look at how games and AI algorithms influence the graphics of a game. So I'm going to turn your question a little bit upside down, because I think the trend from 98 to 2007 was mutually assured destruction amongst the console manufacturers, while the film people were just doing more and more and more bigger pixels and more rendering and more this and more effects. And while the film stuff, that's changed quite a bit, on the game side, actually it seems to have gone in a weird place. I think the Nintendo Wii killed Moore's Law as far as gamers are concerned. And if it didn't kill it, it certainly maimed it, and the iPhone finished it. And what's been really interesting is that the technology of more, more pixels, more bullets, more this, more that, is still there, but it's becoming less interesting. And accessibility, and in some ways lower fidelity, but more interesting graphics are really driving the business now. You see the console manufacturers, or the video game business is going through a very tough period. Studios are still closing 3 years into the recession. You're seeing a lot of people unemployed and going towards these smaller shops where they can just go make fun games and they're accessible. And it's really interesting. So technology is still having this very radical effect, but it's going in weird ways. So while that's happening on one end, we've got this highly accessible games. You've got your Angry Birds, and you've got Plants vs. Zombies, and you've got Cut the Rope, and these fun games that are 4 people make them, graphically maybe. You've also got the CODs and the Battle Storms, all these wild shooters where they're getting more and more expensive to make. And yet there's this interesting dichotomy happening where no one can afford to make those things more and more expensive, but they're getting better and more efficient at making them. What's interesting is if you look at consoles, we're in year 5 or 6 of what's typically a 5-year cycle. And what's really cool about a console cycle is around year 3 or 4, we learn how to make better graphics in those machines. We learn how to start squeezing more and more out of them. So you have that on one extreme, and yet you have people doing squeezing extreme of the small things like the iPhone. And it's a very exciting time, but it's also a very schizophrenic time in the business on the interactive side. And then you have these new things like HBO Go. How does that? I'm curious, is anybody going to make a game that ties into HBO Go? Where you can actually take that experience, or take my entourage with me, and have an interactive experience to go with it. That's the stuff I'm hoping to see, and that's where I'm hoping the technology gets real interesting, brings that craziness back to a commonality.